Hello, and today we're going to be speaking to Philip Hall, and we're going to be talking about UltraClean. So probably most of you won't be familiar with UltraClean, but UltraClean is a technology that is able to take bio-waste and convert that into bioethanol. And we'll explain to you why we think that's so important. This for me is something a little bit different. I've been many years in the software technology sector, dealing with different types of software technology, but this has really jumped out at me. I've known Philip for a number of years. I've seen his progress and the hard work that he's put into it, and it's now all coming to fruition. I think it's very exciting technology, not just for this country, but worldwide. So, Philip, welcome to this call, the Boss It podcast. Thanks for taking the time. Perhaps we'll start off. Tell us a little bit about your background. Before we get too much into UltraClean, let those listening know a little bit about your background and how you got to where we are now.
Okay, well, first of all, a very good morning, Mark. Okay, background, keeping it, I suppose, relatively brief. I suppose the only claim to fame I've got to some extent is I've always employed myself. I've employed myself since I left school, which you can tell by these grey hairs is many years ago. The only brief interlude I had is I did start filing a number of patents a little way back. One of the patents, which was particularly interesting, it was a method of, it was an antimicrobial and it fought infection and the like. That was bought out by a public company and I remained as MD for 3 years, which was part of the agreement. So that's really the only time that I've been employed, as it were. A number of other patents, I guess all successful, but obviously in varying degrees, some vary. Odor control, which was something near and dear to my heart, invented something on that score, and indeed we've carried over some of the ideas into this more latter technology. I suppose it all started off, funnily enough, when I was in the odor control side, and a guy phoned me up one day and he just said, "Oh, are you Philip Hall?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And you remove odor and toxins?" And I said, "Well," and he said, "Right." He said, "I've got 18 people from Greenpeace outside my facilities here. They're picketing the gates. The whole place has come to a standstill because they say I'm sending toxins up into the atmosphere. Can you fix it?" I said, "Well, hang on a minute." I said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm not telling you that. I don't want you to know who I am. Can you do it?" I said, "Well, give me a few days and give me a ring. We'll see how it is." You know, I wrestled with that problem for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it got to something of an obsession where I thought, hang on a minute, what do we do with our waste in this country? We dump it either in our lovely countryside or we set fire to it. There has got to be another way. And I realized what Greenpeace were up in arms about was the fact he had a big incinerator, a chimney, sending toxins up into the atmosphere, and, you know, understandable, I guess. And that really was the catalyst as to how this business came about. I then decided that with my few pennies that I had left from my previous patents, I ploughed the whole lot into building a prototype, if you will, of this technology, because no matter what you say to people, they always say, well, when you've built one, we'll believe it and then we'll fund it. And that's just a never-ending cycle. And you appreciate that. I'm sure your listeners do as well. You've got to physically prove it. So we did build a prototype. It worked straight out of the box, and it would have made a profit were we to produce it. But I could see in there was some inefficiencies. I think that's the best way to decide it. So then over a period of time, I redesigned the thing to be far more efficient, cost effective, and that was good. Then reached the horrible climax of thinking, my goodness, I've now run out of money. I've sold everything that I own, including my cars, which were very near and dear to me.
Yeah.
So after a period, I got involved or stumbled across John, who is my partner in England here, and has a transfer station, and there was a waste station in the Midlands. And he very kindly said, well, I could tell you what, let's build it here. I love the idea. Let's do a proof of concept. And that's what we've been doing over the last couple of years, building it up to a stage whereby now we can actually produce ethanol, which is the end game in what we're trying to do. We're taking household waste, which, as I've said, we either burn or bury. But in this case, we're turning it into what I think is a very useful product because ethanol is, I think it's 99 point something percent clean, green fuel, unlike our sulfur-ridden oil or other such things. So I think it's got a very useful place. And ethanol, as you know, is used in a plethora of other things, from paints to nail varnish to goodness knows what else. So that was the basic idea.
I mean, I've seen your progress over a number of years. What drives you forward? Because you've really committed to this. And I think maybe people would see it almost as an obsession. But what is it that keeps...
a good way? Gosh,
I mean,
you and my wife together here.
Yeah, throwing all your money in it, selling your Aston Martins, which I know you loved. What was that you saw that really drove you forward to make you say, I've got to do this?
Yeah, well, that bit was very hard, I have to say. Anyway, I have once likened it. I'm not a gambler, I have to say, but I've likened it a little bit to like a game of, I think, poker. Not that I understand it, but I think you put so much in, you suddenly realized, wow, I'm so in here, I can't afford to lose now. And there is a situation there which I would not advise to anybody, but life's life, it comes about. And it certainly has faced me, whereby you put absolutely everything and more into it because you need to go one step further. One of the lessons I suppose that I have learned is that whilst inventing something takes quite a while, quite a bit of ingenuity, and quite a bit of time. But my goodness, raising the funding is 3 times as long as inventing the product. And I don't care who you are, that is a fact. Raising the finance, because always the financiers have a question and want you to go one step further, and hence your game of poker. You think, well, okay, I will build one more. I will do one more test, and so on and so forth. So that, I suppose, is the driver, necessity.
Yes. You mentioned about that you originally built a prototype, and now I've got that proof of concept up and working. Yeah. What was the real breakthrough for you? At what point did you go, wow? Because I know in looking at UltraClean and sort of getting my head around it and really getting to understand it, we're not saying here that this is the first process that can take organic material and turn it into bioethanol. It actually, when you really get to understand it, the implications for this are global. But there must have been a point where you went, wow, because I know I did. You look at it and you think, this is big. When was that for you in your journey?
Well, I think I've got my partner John to blame for that, actually. I mean, we got halfway through our deal, which was very matter of fact. We both stood up, shook hands, that was it. And it was almost as a throwaway line. He said, Well, he said, this acid hydrolysis business, he said, I'm not going to have thousands of tons of sulfuric acid on my site, am I? And I sort of went gulp. No, John, I'm sure there's a way around that. Well, that did take me back a step. And the reason that the Germans made fuel during the war with their technology there, and that technology has still remained to this day, is because it is blooming hard to get away around it.
Mm.
But we have eventually done it. So we've filed a way of getting around acid hydrolysis, which is a nasty business. And if it can be avoided, that's absolutely great. And the other area, I guess, is the enzymes that we use, which is to a particular formula, and it's a number of enzymes in a number of blends in a number of different ways, has given us the ability to get a very high yield. So from 1 ton of household rubbish, we may get 250, 300 litres of good quality bioethanol. So that really starts to make the whole thing sing. It gets very exciting in terms of its profitability. You've got to remember that now the market has turned a little bit because there is more waste. So councils are actually saying, would you take some household waste off us and we will pay you a sum of money? So imagine yourself as in a factory making, I don't know, making cars. How exciting would it be if the stainless steel fabricator said to you, tell you what, I'll pay you to take the raw ingredients, the stainless steel to make your car.
Yes.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
a tick in the box.
Yeah.
So with that, we then go on one step further and say, well, okay, because it's a green fuel and because we're taking waste out of the environment, there are certain credits, subsidies available from the government, which are great. We, of course, stating the obvious, sell the ethanol on the open market. It's a tradable commodity, so we can sell it basically to any one of the big refineries. So that's fairly straightforward. In addition, we've got some other advantages, I guess. CO2 is a very, very prickly subject at the moment. People are trying desperately to minimize the CO2. Otherwise, they're faced with having to buy credits. Well, we actually would produce credits because we are CO2 negative. So we're taking a product which, of course, has had its CO2 extracted. In other words, the bread, which was corn, has now been harvested, and the pizza, the cardboard box, anything which is a biomass has had the CO2 taken out of it. Mm. So in our process, it going through, yes, there is CO2 then released, but minimally. We pick that up and inject it back into the feedstock to help break it down a little bit more, which gives us a bigger bang for our buck at the end. In other words, a little bit more ethanol because it's easier to convert. The balance of that we turn into a liquid, which is quite a tricky thing to do and quite expensive. And then we would sell that. And that, of course, is what goes into your Coca-Cola, the fizz and the bubbles and your beer, etc.
There's quite a few points in that I'd like to sort of pick up on. But first of all, let's just talk about, you talk about household waste, but maybe let's define that a little bit, because I think that's one of the differentiating things about your technology. So, you know, for instance, in the States and in Brazil, there are bioethanol plants, but typically they're using corn or they're using sugarcane. So one single crop. Big disadvantage of that is that you're using a food crop that can feed animals and humans. And we've got 1 billion people that are starving in the world. So using something that can be used for food is not ideal. What can you feed? I mean, if we think of this in simplistic terms, you've got a hopper at one end and you feed it with this bio waste, and at the other end you get bioethanol. We can talk about the uses for that. What can we be feeding into this hopper? Perhaps give some examples.
Basically anything that is a biomass. So that can be grass cuttings, hedgerow clippings, which councils, of course, do collect, and is a real pain because what do you do with it? Obviously, all foodstuffs from your pizzas to your cake to your bread to your anything which is a foodstuff, but leftover food, waste food, food which is thrown away and is in that little bin that we now 46%, I think, of this country use and put out their food scraps. I think next year it becomes law. So, of course, that food stock will virtually double, round figures. And that's why I think the councils are somewhat anxious. Hey, what on earth are we going to do with it? Hence them approaching us and saying, we would pay you a sum of money now to take it. So anything which is a biomass we can take from, and that's cardboard, paper, and all sorts of material of that ilk. Okay.
So at the moment, that bio waste is being disposed of, and that typically would be incineration or landfill. Now, this may seem an obvious question. What's wrong with that?
Well, I guess with regard to landfill, I should be careful what I say, because I think really in Europe, the standards of landfill are very high. Where I've traveled in other parts of the world, I have to say that is not the case. And landfill, of course, goes into underground water, it spreads, it travels, and suddenly a village maybe 3 or 4 miles down the way is drinking contaminated water with the most horrendous results. With regard to incineration, yes, again, there are scrubbers and there are a lot of things which are built in to minimize toxins going to atmosphere. Call me cynical if you will, but I absolutely do not believe that all of the scrubbers take care of that. I do not believe all of the scrubbers are so religiously changed as they should be. Bearing in mind some of these may cost £1,000, these filters. Well, why do I want to change it today? Why not leave it till tomorrow, and so forth? So I think what we're doing is incineration has a place because it makes electricity, and we all want that, goodness knows. I don't think I have the complete solution. I'm not the panacea for everything,
sure,
but I do go a long way to it. And I think with a suite of technologies, we can move forward. I mean, you might be surprised to know I am actually not a tree hugger. I'm not a tree hugger. Do I believe in the concept that we should look after our planet? Absolutely. Do I believe we can do a lot more? Absolutely. What I do believe in is that the wit of man, bearing in mind we put a bloody rocket on the moon in 1969 and a man, it should not be beyond our wit to invent something that doesn't stop us turning off the heating in the middle of winter, doesn't stop us driving to the shops in our car. We should have the ability in our brain, should have the ability to invent clean technology that doesn't affect the planet, but by the same token, doesn't restrict the way we live our lives. And I think that's an important point.
So you've got the bio waste that's going into this hopper in very simplistic terms. The other really attractive aspect of this is how you are doing that production, because you're not burning fossil fuels. That's one issue. And I think when people think about, if we were to call it a production plant, I prefer not to use that phrase really when talking about UltraClean, because this is a new standard.
Yeah.
It's a processing unit. But if you think of a plant, a typical plant, if you were heard that there's planning permission for a plant to be set up at the end of your street, you're going to think of a large building with chimneys belching out smoke. This isn't doing that, and I want to make that really clear, because that's very, very important.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, typically, you know, the footprint of our technology may be a small B&Q store. I mean, it's as innocuous just as that. Do we have big chimneys? Do we have incineration? No, no, we don't. Not at all.
Mm,
Um, what we, I mean, basically running through it, the model might be something in the order of taking about 40,000 tons of unwanted waste. We don't have that sitting around for weeks and weeks and weeks. It comes in and it goes through our process with it sort of pretty well immediate effect. We do have facilities to take out any odor that there may be, but I can assure you there is very, very, very little. The process would take, as I say, circa, say, 5 tons an hour would go through our process. We would then mix that with, well, we would treat it and reduce its size very considerably down to almost like a soup. Then we would add these enzymes, which I discussed with you in just large mixing tanks. It would then go on to a fermentation process, which we're all familiar with. It's how we make our beer and our wine. And in fact, if you can picture in your mind a small winery, that's more what you'd be looking at with my process rather than a big refinery with massive, great big towers. We don't have any incineration. We do produce some steam, but it's done totally naturally out of the only byproduct that we have. So as we process all of this waste, we end up with a fluffy type of material, which is lignin, and that's the only real byproduct that we have. But lignin is very calorific, and we can put that into our little steam generator, which produces the steam, which runs the plant, which feeds then the final process, which is the distillation column. So we just have a simple distillation column as you would in a brewery, because ethanol is alcohol by any other name. It's pure, it's natural. So in order to produce the ethanol at the end of the distillation column, we would inject steam in there. And that's really a slight oversimplification, of course, but that's the proof of concept which we filed patents on.
And do you use all of the lignin in the process, or is there a
Absolutely.
surplus?
No, we use it all. It is also, strangely enough, a very valuable commodity. So again, should there be an excess, we could sell it, and that gives us an additional income stream. So there are several other income streams that we have apart from the CO2 that we mentioned. The other one, which we could perhaps just touch on very briefly now, which again is a big interest at the moment, is sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. And everybody's saying, well, you know, we haven't got enough of this stuff. It's just madness. How are we going to fly our planes? I think you need to lay waste virtually the entire amount of England to grow crops just to feed some of the planes that we run out of, some of the airlines that we run out of Heathrow. Now, we've already covered, you know, crops should be for food, which should be eaten by us, not fed into engines. So we have a solution of making SAF out of waste material, of which there is plenty.
Yes.
If you go around and see some of these landfill sites, you know, they cover acres and acres and acres and acres, and they're going 100 feet deep. So they are massive. There is a lot of waste that we produce in this country that we could utilize a lot better.
It's such a logical solution. You're taking what is a liability in disposing of bio waste, and you're able to convert that and turn it into an asset, which is clean fuel. I mean,
yeah,
it's
does make sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does a little bit, yeah, rather than have to take up land.
Yeah.
You mentioned that this was a conversation that we had just beforehand, that for SAF, the UltraClean bioethanol is short chain molecule. Maybe you can sort of touch upon that without getting too technical, because there is an advantage there. I found it interesting, and I'm sure some of the listeners will as well.
Okay. This is where half our audience are going to nod off. I
No,
told
no,
you.
stay on board, guys.
I,
This is
I
good.
said to you, we should have rehearsed this. Now we're ad-libbing it. We're going to...
Yeah.
Okay, well, very, very, very simplistically. So the byproduct that we make at the end of the day after we make the ethanol, you have to make ethanol first in order to make then ethylene, which is the first footprint of making SAF. Okay, so it's an extended continuous process, and if you like, it's a bolt-on goodie into one of our plants. You can have it or you can not have it, whichever is your preference, because there is a very, very big market for just pure ethanol, as you know. For those that aren't totally aware, we're all using 10% ethanol in our motor cars right now. So it is a clean fuel. The government are trying to promote that in order not to buy oil from our Arab friends and using our good currency for that. So why not produce ethanol, which is clean, add that to our car and supplement oil? The point that you raised is quite an interesting one. And I had a situation of trying to explain it to somebody only a couple of days ago. The molecule comes out, it is a short chain molecule. So that's what we actually produce. What does that mean? Well, obviously, the opposite end of that is a long chain molecule, and we do not produce that. If you're flying a plane, the biggest incentive that you have is to fly high. Why? Because the air is thinner, there is less resistance, therefore your fuel will go that much further. Makes perfect sense. The only disadvantage to flying over 60,000 feet or whatever, it's very cold. As a consequence, the fuel will gradually start to freeze and you just can't go up to those high. And traditional oil is a long chain molecule. We are a short chain. The way I liken that, if you imagine a bundle of pencils on your desk, when you pick them up, they all stick together firmly and hardly. That's a long chain molecule, and they've frozen. If you now relate that to a bunch of India rubbers, which you've got on the other side of your desk, and you pick that up, well, it's like herding cats because they're all over the place. But the advantage of that short chain molecule is you can't squeeze them all together, and there is air between, and that air stops things freezing. Well, it stops it, shall we say, it gives you a considerable height advantage. You can fly that much higher, less resistance, therefore saving on fuel. So that's, I suppose, a little byproduct, as I think Michael Caine would have said. Not many people know that.
Yes.
It's just a small advantage that we may have. We need to explore that a little bit more. We haven't fully exploited the SAF side of it. We've only built a plant as a proof of concept, whereby we've taken all of the design that we know about, we put it into a full-sized model, so not a miniature, a full-size model, and we've demonstrated that we can do it, and we've had it tested, the ethanol, so we know we're on the right track.
So an SAF is just one particular use of the bioethanol. I mean, obviously, the first one that may spring to mind is putting the fuel into cars. And I think there's sometimes confusion there. I didn't realize, for instance, in Brazil, that the majority of drivers are using bioethanol to a much larger extent than we are here. There are smaller amounts. Maybe talk a little bit about that and give some people an idea there, because there are new flexible fuel vehicles that are being manufactured today. I mean, and actually, when I looked, I was quite surprised of how many of the major manufacturers have these flexi fuel vehicles. But you can also convert some of the older vehicles as well. So it is a very practical solution.
It is. I mean, bless the Brazilians, they were quite smart 20, 30 years ago. They realized that the country had some economical problems, and the last thing they wanted to do would be buying millions and millions of gallons of crude oil to be refined to put into their cars. using their hard-earned currency. So they developed a way, of course, they produce a lot of sugar out there. So sugar cane, sweetness, the basis of producing alcohol. Alcohol is basically a fuel. So they developed and been running cars on 80% fuel for probably 25 years. They do on occasions use a very small amount, sometimes down to 5%. There are cars that run on 100% ethanol. I think actually, if I recall rightly, the Bentleys in this country, you could put in 100% ethanol into them. I believe that's the case because it's got such an advanced flexible engine. The flexi fuel, as you pointed out, a lot of manufacturers have that for sure. And we in this country run 10%. I think there are several countries in Europe now moving to 15%. There's talk in India of moving to 20%. Why? Because it would save them a fortune in terms of importing oil. Apart from that, it's clean. They're not choking people to death with it. And they've got a lot of waste product. Don't forget, it's not only food stock, but it's also waste farming vegetation. We're not saying we'll take the maize crop out, but what happens to the leaf, the stem, the root, the thing? That's all a biomass. We can take that as opposed to them setting fire to it in a field, sending up clouds and plumes of foul smoke. So we would take all that, utilize it, and give back clean green ethanol. As you say, it's a very logical solution.
And the other advantage being it's in a liquid form, which means that for vehicles, we have the infrastructure already to be able to distribute that and make that available to car drivers.
We do.
Which is one of the big issues with electric, is having to get enough of those charging plants in place. So it does give this country and other countries alternatives. Alternative means to be able to keep driving the cars, but in a much cleaner way.
You're absolutely right. I think there are going to be a lot of companies that are going to miss their 2035 target of going green. I think that's absolutely inevitable. We're all familiar with this greenwashing that I think there are a lot of people doing at the moment. I'm just saying, yep, we'll do that, don't worry. I think the reality will form when people don't get tenders anymore because they don't actually comply with the legislation, and people therefore are unable to give them tenders to produce whatever it may be because they're not conforming. That'll be a wake-up call. That really will be a wake-up call.
Yeah, and I think because of organisations such as Greenpeace and others, the general public are that much more educated regarding some of these so-called solutions, and that puts pressure on politicians, and they will put legislation in place to be able to address that greenwashing.
Yeah, and for all that one says about the Greenpeace, it does keep the politicians' feet to the fire, and there is something to be said for that because we're not doing enough at the moment. I mean, again, somebody said to me the other day, there's not a crisis of energy in this country at the moment. There is only a crisis of imagination. And I thought that just about sums up where we are at the moment. I think there's every good intention, but we've really now got to get behind this and do things absolutely constructive. What we've done in a very simple way is given a simple solution to a real problem, getting rid of waste and converting it into a green fuel. The other advantage I would like to say is that we don't have a program like nuclear of taking maybe 10 years to build a plant. We could build a plant in 9 months to a prepared site. We could erect a plant, deliver it, and have it producing ethanol, 20,000 litres a day, 25,000 litres a day, which, bearing in mind we are doing it little and often, we're not advocating massive, great big refinery type plants. We are just small little winery locally, which is inoffensive, The footprint is inoffensive. The truck movement is inoffensive. And we could dot all of these around a major city or major town. So you haven't got to start, as is the want with councils, dragging waste right the way across the city centre in great big polluting trucks. We would have a far better footprint in handling that waste.
And importantly, this is a process that can be done profitably. It's not going to be done losing money, which is always important, which is fantastic.
It's a good start when somebody pays you for the raw material. That's a really good.
Yes. How often does that happen?
That does focus your mind.
Yes.
You get paid them for the product. You get paid a subsidy. Thank you very much for that. I have to say, ethanol is relatively buoyant at the moment, and a little of that is because of world affairs, and we'll go down that road. But it is a commodity. It does go up and it does go down. But if you draw a straight line, it's very, very profitable.
Well, even if you just look at the SAF demand, I mean, because there are high targets regarding aviation fuel, and at the moment they're not even reaching 1%.
No, that's the
massive growth in just one area.
We are light years away from putting sufficient SAF into all of our planes. The other thing is, don't forget, SAF is double, treble the cost of conventional fuel. I can see the airlines' bottom lip quivering the more encouragement we have in providing them with SAF, because making it in conventional form, it is expensive. Making it in our form, whereby it's coming from waste and we're being paid for that, that's such a big kicker in the production line. Much as I'd like to make obscene profits, but to be reasonable, we could be extremely competitive with this technology.
So you've got an invention in UltraClean which addresses global warming, which creates a clean green fuel, and it removes the bio waste that's currently been disposed of with incineration and with landfill. What's your next invention going to do?
Oh, God. Yes, quite. I think you better speak to my wife about that, but have a good solicitor with you while you do it. As I say, I've had a number of 4 or 5 patents now. They are all time consuming.
Yes.
Question. I always made the philosophy that I would be the ideal perfect man, and I would have about 1/3 of my life would be family, and 1/3 would be business, and 1/3 would be me time.
Yes.
Well, that's gone to hell in a handcart, I can tell you. So it would be nice to get some semblance of order back in my life, I guess. I won't say I'm a workaholic, but I'm not too far away from it. And
no.
I get very stimulated with ideas, and there is immense satisfaction in knowing that you're actually producing something which is good for the planet, good for us, profitable, and perhaps will give us a competitive edge on good old GB Limited, and we can sell this technology to the rest of the world. And how good to get income investment back into this country for doing that.
Absolutely.
I'm very patriotic, and the more we can do to leg up this country, the better. We have probably the most inventive, I think we are per capita, I think we're the most inventive in the world.
Yes.
Where we fail, and you've got to give the Americans their credit, they are generally more adventurous than us. You go to America, you say, I've got an idea. The guy says, well, how much do you want? What's it going to take? What am I going to get? The conversation in England is a lot more laborious than that. So of all of the technology that's invented here, a higher proportion doesn't get out of the starting block. Now,
Mm.
I've been fortunate enough to the 4 patents, at least I've got them to the starting gate. One's been very profitable. I have to say, of what I've invented, this just blows my mind as being
Yeah.
far and above the most exciting, far and above the most adventurous. We can really, really make a difference with this technology.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this recording with you, because I have had a number of conversations with people trying to explain to them what UltraClean is. And it does blow people's mind. I think that some people have a sort of an understanding of traditional bioethanol production, but to really grasp this and see its full implications, it takes a little bit of time. You have to sit there and absorb it. I'm pretty sure that you're going to continue innovating, probably around UltraClean. There's another recording that we could do talking about kelp farms and how to farm that we've sort of touched upon.
Well,
Which,
that's an amazing other opportunity.
yeah,
Rotten seaweed on the coast, we could harvest that. That's got a calorific value. We could turn that into. I was talking last week to somebody in Kenya who's got a chicken farm, and believe it or not, produces 20 tons of chicken poo a day. And now they are struggling as to what to do with it. Well, again, very calorific. We could utilize all of that, and we could make ethanol for the locals in Kenya. Coffee, I mean, lots of places around the world making coffee. What do you do with all of the grouts, all of the grains that, again, I laughingly say it's steak and chips to us. We could pick all that up and we could make valuable ethanol, a valuable fuel in very remote areas, very
yeah,
remote. And what is wrong with that?
no, absolutely. If there was one message that you wanted somebody to go away with after listening to this, what would that be regarding UltraClean?
Wow. I suppose, don't be complacent. It's very, very easy to sort of take the status quo and go with it. Be a bit adventurous. Stick your head up above the parapet. Somebody last week said, well, entrepreneurs like you, and I sort of bulk against that word. And I said, no, don't call me an entrepreneur. I think that's over-egged and overused. And an entrepreneur, in my opinion, is a really staggering person that probably works without a parachute. And by that, I mean, he puts everything on the line, and he hasn't got a magic sequence at the end of the month. The roof opens and a check comes down and he's secure. To me, an entrepreneur is somebody that funds everything himself and works without a parachute. He invents and he tries, and then he tries again. So my message would be try and try again, and don't be complacent. Don't settle for second best, because there is a best.
Well, you said you certainly haven't done with the work that you've done on UltraClean. It's something that you've been doing for many, many years. And I would love to see this really get to the level that I think it deserves to on a global scale. And if the UK can get behind this and the UK can benefit from it, well, all the better. Because as you said, there's been a lot of great innovation here in this country, but I don't think that we've been particularly good at commercializing it. But maybe
No.
this can be one of those where they do.
I think one of the areas that we've not exploited, and I suppose we must say we're partly to blame, is we haven't had any government assistance, encouragement, finance whatsoever. Now, the government do give away subsidies pretty liberally in some of the hairy schemes that we've all come across. And it's easy to criticize them. But I think ours does have justification for some good support. So we'd certainly like, if anybody's listening from the government, we would certainly like a leg up. That leg up might not be financially. It may be an introduction to somebody that maybe is making some of our equipment cheaper than we could ever imagine. And that helps us get our prices down and be more competitive. We also would welcome any discussions with would-be investors. Yeah, we funded all this ourselves, and our eyes are watering. I make no mistake about it. Building a plant from scratch over a few years, you don't have any income stream. You just write out checks and they go one way every month. So again, investment would be, yeah, would be very interesting. But we will take it forward. I'm slightly ashamed to say, as a patriotic Englishman, we've got more interest overseas than we have got in our own country. But
exactly.
I'll not dwell on that.
No. Well, perhaps we should finish with that nudge in the ribs to the UK government. Maybe we can get this in front of them so they can maybe just sit up and pay attention. But that's been great speaking to you today. Very clear explanation. It's helped me even further with my understanding. And thank you very much for your time today.
Good. It's been fun. Thanks. Thank you, Mark, for the opportunity. And we'll speak again soon. Take care.
Super. Thanks very much.
Bye. Bye.